So, have you ever felt like a really bone deep, totally unexplainable connection to a culture or a language, or maybe even a specific landscape that just absolutely does not match your physical background?
Oh, yeah. Like a totally irrational pull.
Right. And we are not talking about, just enjoying a foreign film or really liking a certain type of food.
No, definitely no.
We're talking about a resonance so intense and like visceral that it feels less like a preference you acquired over time and more like an actual living memory.
Like you've literally been there before.
Exactly. Like maybe you hear a specific phonetic rhythm in a language you literally do not speak, or you smell a specific blend of herbs, and your entire nervous system just reacts with this profound sense of returning home.
It's a deeply disorienting experience for the people who actually go through it.
Yeah.
Because we operate in a society that firmly conditions us to believe that our identities basically begin at absolute zero the moment we're born.
Right. Like a blank slate.
Exactly. You are your genetics, you are your immediate environment, and, well, anything outside of that is just a hobby or an acquired taste.
Mm.
So to suggest that a part of you actually predates your own physical form completely shatters that foundational assumption.
It really does. And that brings us to the core of what we're looking at today. What if that magnetic pull you feel isn't just you being like a highly empathetic tourist in the world? What if it is literally your soul remembering the communities and the landscapes where it has already lived?
Yeah, that is the huge question driving today's deep dive.
We are looking at a really fascinating, highly philosophical, and honestly incredibly complex essay. It's titled The Soul Has No Race: Racism Across Lifetimes, Cultural Memory, and the Reclamation of Cross-Incarnational Identity.
It's a heavy title, but wow, it goes to some interesting places.
It really does. And our goal today is basically to act as impartial cartographers. We are just going to map out the framework this author builds. They take these ancient cosmologies of reincarnation and like force them to collide with our very modern, highly policed, and very rigid discussions of race, belonging, and identity.
Right, and setting out to map this text really requires us to look closely at both the spiritual claims the author is making and, the strict material boundaries they establish in the physical world.
Yeah, because it's a very fine line to walk.
Totally. The essay navigates this incredibly sensitive intersection. It asks the reader to hold a spiritual reality and a harsh social reality in the same hand without, like, collapsing either of them.
Which is hard to do.
Really hard. And to understand how the author manages that tension, we have to start with how they actually define the baggage a soul carries from one life to the next.
Right, because in most Western pop culture understandings of reincarnation, the soul is treated almost like a student carrying a very abstract report card.
Oh, yeah, like karma points.
Exactly. You lived a life where you were greedy, so you carry a karmic debt into your next life to learn a lesson about charity. It's framed as an evolution of abstract virtues. But this text argues for something infinitely more concrete. The author insists the soul carries what they call somatic imprints.
Yeah, and the term somatic is the key differentiator here.
Right.
The text defines these imprints as cellular, bodily memories of lived experiences.
Mm.
It is a resonance with the specific music, the literal dirt, the food, and the precise rituals of a past community.
It's physical.
Very physical. The essay argues these are not new affinities formed in your current lifetime. They're defined explicitly as recognitions. The feeling of belonging is already encoded into the essence of the individual at a level that's entirely beneath conscious, rational thought.
I was thinking about this, and if we think about how memory works biologically, it's almost like grafting a branch from an ancient heritage fruit tree onto a brand new sapling you just planted in your yard.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Like the roots in the ground are new, the bark on the trunk is new, but the cellular makeup of that grafted branch remembers the soil of its origin, and the fruit it eventually yields is going to taste like that original orchard.
Exactly.
The hardware of your current body might be new, but the software, the soul, is operating on the deep biological memory of a different environment.
Yeah, taking that grafting concept further, the text insists that a soul who has survived through the specific genius of a community like a soul who has endured its historical grief and participated in its cultural joy cannot possibly emerge into a new physical form with all of that erased.
It just doesn't vanish.
Right. The recognition is an indelible mark. The author distills this entire mechanism into a singular, really powerful phrase. They write, "The body changes, the soul remembers." The soul simply refuses to begin from zero.
Wow. The body changes, the soul remembers. So the inner reality is one of profound continuity. But the external reality is where this essay introduces a massive structural friction.
Yeah, the real-world collision.
Because society does not look at the grafted branch, right? Society only looks at the rootstock. What happens when the soul's memory meets the demographic facts of the current body, and the rest of the world looks at that combination and says, well, those two things are entirely incompatible.
Right, and the text calls this collision a racial mismatch.
A racial mismatch.
Yeah. The narrative explores the heavy reality of that mismatch by detailing very specific demographic scenarios. The author describes, for example, a soul who was historically brown now inhabiting a pale body,
Okay.
or a soul who was once East Asian now navigating a society that reads them entirely as black, or an indigenous soul who is now living inside a white body. In all of these scenarios, the internal memory and the external presentation are fundamentally at odds.
And society relies exclusively on visual, demographic paperwork to grant permission for cultural participation.
Exactly.
So when a person in one of these mismatched bodies displays an instinctive, pre-rational pull toward the spiritual practices or the music of their past life, the external world reacts with intense hostility.
Yeah, they get accused of cultural appropriation.
Right.
They're accused of fetishizing a marginalized group or, just performing a false identity for attention.
Which is such a heavy accusation.
It is. The text actually applies a very arresting term to this dynamic. They call it racism operating across incarnational time.
Wait, wow. Racism across incarnational time.
Yeah. The argument here is that society is punishing the soul for failing to display the correct physical credentials to validate its own lived memory. The genuine spiritual recognition is treated as a modern social crime, simply because the current skin doesn't align with the historical resume.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we look at the reality of human behavior, I really have to challenge the feasibility of the author's premise here on behalf of anyone listening.
Yeah.
Because people absolutely do steal, co-opt, and appropriate cultures that do not belong to them, often causing real material harm to marginalized communities.
Oh, 100%. The text doesn't deny that.
Right. So if this inner knowing is completely invisible, how on earth does society, or even the individual themselves, police the boundary between a genuine cross-incarnational memory and harmful, entitled cultural appropriation? Because if a person privately feels they have this inner knowing, human nature kind of dictates they will eventually want to express it outwardly and claim space.
And that is the exact tension. The author actually dedicates a significant portion of the framework to answering that exact operational problem.
Oh, good.
The text establishes a very rigid boundary regarding reclamation. It explicitly states that this cross-incarnational cosmology cannot be used as a spiritual loophole to bypass material accountability.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. Race, as a modern construct, remains a structural, political, and material reality that has devastatingly real consequences for embodied people today.
So the text is essentially saying that your past life memory doesn't negate someone else's present-day oppression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The warning in the essay is totally unambiguous. It's as if a person currently living in a socially privileged body uses their claim of past life kinship to override the voices of living members of an oppressed community.
Or uses it to center themselves.
Yes, or uses it to center themselves in spaces that are not theirs to lead today. They are weaponizing the cosmology.
Right.
The author establishes a very clear distinction. Past life memory confers an inner knowing, not an external authority over living communities.
Right. Deference is key.
Deference to the people who carry those lineages in their physical bodies right now is a non-negotiable requirement of this framework.
You know, it makes me think of having a profound emotional connection to your childhood home.
Oh.
Say you live there for 20 years, you know every creak in the floorboards, you know how the light hits the kitchen at dawn, and your love for that space is entirely genuine.
Totally valid.
But you cannot simply walk through the front door today and start rearranging the living room furniture because a new family rightfully lives there now. Your historical memory of the space is valid, but the new family holds the current deed. You have to respect their structural ownership.
That's a perfect way to put it. Your emotional truth does not grant you structural authority in the present moment. The essay demands that the individual hold two competing truths simultaneously without allowing one to cancel out the other.
Which is a lot to ask of a person.
It is, but the boundaries established by the living community to protect themselves are legitimate, and the soul's private cultural memory is also legitimate.
But navigating that tension just seems like an overwhelming psychological burden. I mean, you are constantly carrying an inner truth that you are actively prohibited from expressing outwardly.
Yeah, it creates a serious split.
And the text points out that living in that state of chronic dissonance causes very distinct psychological and spiritual injuries, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. The author actually maps out 3 specific directions that this wound travels within the individual.
Okay, let's go through those.
So the first direction is outward in.
Outward.
Yeah, this is the direct result of the external policing we just discussed.
Okay.
It's the soul experiencing active exclusion, suspicion, and mockery from the living members of the lineage it remembers.
Oh, that's brutal.
Because the current body doesn't signal the connection, the person is essentially told by the community they love that their grief is theatrical
Mhm.
and their sense of kinship is like an offensive invention.
And if society is constantly hitting you with that outward in rejection, the natural human defense mechanism is to just shut the behavior down entirely.
Exactly.
You preemptively hide that part of yourself so you don't get attacked, which leads directly to the second direction the wound travels, right? The inward wound. The text calls it self-erasure.
Yeah, self-erasure. The essay describes how profoundly a person can absorb the external world's rigid rules of cultural belonging. They internalize the policing to the point where they silence their own knowing. They actively refuse to engage with the traditions, the music, or the practices that feel like home, solely to appear appropriately boundary to outside observers. They perform this deep disconnection from their own soul's memory.
I mean, it is a profound tragedy to participate in the diminishment of your own soul just to appease a modern demographic category.
It really is.
The energy it must take to constantly suppress what feels like your own nature has to be exhausting.
Exhausting and damaging. But the third direction the wound travels is what really demands a deep dive because it moves beyond the immediate social dynamics of today.
Right. The text refers to it as past life internalized racism.
Yeah. When we look at the broader implications of reincarnation through the lens of systemic oppression, the essay points out that systems of supremacy don't just injure the physical body, they infiltrate the architecture of the soul itself.
The spiritual injury survives the death of the physical body.
Exactly.
To put a concrete scenario to that mechanism, imagine a soul that has spent the last 400 years incarnating exclusively into bodies that were subjected to systemic subjugation, colonization, or enslavement.
Okay.
That soul eventually transitions and is born today into a socially privileged body.
Right.
The external world looks at that person and sees only privilege and power. But internally, the soul is operating on centuries of learned submission, systemic trauma, and internalized self-diminishment. The software is still running the trauma of the oppressed, even though the hardware is now privileged.
And the dissonance there is staggering. The current physical reality offers safety, but the somatic imprints carry a deep historical terror. The text frames the process of locating and identifying the specific layer of internalized past life trauma, not as an exercise in self-punishment or like misplaced guilt, but as a crucial site of profound integration and healing.
It's fascinating. And if we are dealing with psychological wounds of this magnitude, we have to look for historical blueprints.
Definitely.
Because humans have believed in the transmigration of the soul for thousands of years across countless cultures. And the author actually surveys several ancient wisdom traditions to see how they accounted for this cross-cultural, cross-incarnational memory.
Yeah, the survey provided in the text highlights how global cosmologies have always made room for the soul's expansive nature.
Right.
It looks closely at the Yoruba and Ifa traditions, which center on the concept of the Ori.
The Ori.
Yeah, the Ori is the individual essence or destiny of the soul, which accumulates wisdom and identity across all its known experiences. The tradition holds that this essence absolutely cannot be stripped away or reset simply because the soul takes on a new physical form.
The text also spends time on the Hindu concept of samskaras, which really explains the actual mechanism of these affinities.
Yeah, that part is so interesting.
It describes samskaras not just as passive memories, but as deep grooves or impressions worn into the fabric of the soul by repeated action over lifetimes. If you engage in a specific cultural or spiritual practice, life after life, you wear a deep groove into your soul.
Like a record?
Exactly, like a record. When you are born into a new body, the needle of your consciousness naturally falls into that old groove, creating an irresistible, pre-rational affinity for that practice, completely regardless of your new ethnicity.
And the essay also layers in Buddhist teachings on karmic relational clusters, suggesting that souls travel in interconnected groups across multiple lifetimes.
So you stick together.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
In this view, cultural belonging isn't dictated by genetic bloodlines, but by karmic gravity. The text also references indigenous and shamanic traditions where ancestors regularly claim and guide living individuals who reside entirely outside of their genetic lineage.
Okay, so what does this all mean? If we have the Yoruba Ori, Hindu samskaras, and Buddhist karmic clusters acting as these historical blueprints, why does the author conclude that a person experiencing this mismatch today is still fundamentally stranded?
That's the big question.
Why does the text argue that the modern individual has to build an entirely new framework to survive this?
Because none of those ancient cosmologies were designed to navigate the hyper-categorized, intensely policed demographic structures of the 21st century.
Ah, right.
Ancient traditions evolved in worlds with very different understandings of borders, tribe, and identity. They did not have to contend with our modern systemic racial structures or the specific political weight of cultural appropriation.
It's a completely different landscape now.
Totally. The modern soul is caught in a unique historical bind. They possess an ancient, plural, multi-lifetime reality, but they're forced to navigate a modern social grid that demands they fit neatly into a single, highly regulated demographic box.
The ancient tools are basically trying to fix a uniquely modern structural machine,
Exactly.
which forces us to look at the resolution the essay finally offers. If you are an individual experiencing this profound mismatch, and the ancient traditions aren't enough to protect you from modern social policing, how do you actually reconcile this without losing your mind?
Yeah.
The text proposes a process it calls an internal reauthorization.
Yeah, the pivot the author makes here is moving the battleground entirely out of the public sphere. The text explains that true reclamation of your soul's history is not an argument you have to win with society.
Right.
It's not a performance you put on to prove your credentials. Reclamation is the deeply private act of the soul, giving itself permission to honor what it inherently knows to be true.
Here's where it gets really interesting because the relief in that concept is massive. The author is giving the reader permission to stop fighting the external world's demographic categories.
Yes.
You don't have to convince the current homeowner to let you rearrange the furniture. You can simply build the altar in your own private space. You can listen to the music, you can engage in the prayers, and you can feel the ancestral grief without needing anyone in the external world to validate your right to do so.
Nobody has to stamp your passport.
Exactly. Saying internally, I have been here before and this is mine, becomes a private, radical act of integration. You are simply refusing to perform the forgetting that society demands.
Which leads to the ultimate cosmological implication of the entire essay.
Yeah.
If we fully accept the premise that the soul moves continuously through bodies of many colors, many lineages, and many disparate cultures over millennia, then the modern insistence on a singular, fixed racial identity is exposed as an incredibly narrow illusion. It's a feature of a single lifetime. It is not a feature of the soul.
A demographic box is just a temporary physical address.
Right.
It's a set of coordinates you occupy for 80 years, not the eternal identity of the consciousness residing there.
The rigid categories we operate under today have immense material and political consequences that must be respected, but they do not represent the whole story of human consciousness. A soul that chooses to carry its full, vibrant, plural history forward into the present isn't confused, and it's not appropriating. It is achieving profound integration.
Wow. We have mapped out a fiercely challenging, incredibly layered framework today.
Well, it really have.
This text demands that we respect the harsh, undeniably real material boundaries of race and structural inequality in our current world, while simultaneously leaving the door wide open for the vast cross-incarnational history of the human soul. It's basically a call to be deeply responsible in the present moment without actively erasing the visceral, somatic memories of our past.
Yeah. And before we close this deep dive, there's a final, broader implication to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
The text focuses heavily on how the individual reconciles this mismatch internally. But what if we applied this framework to society at large?
Oh, wow.
Right. If we operated under the assumption that every single person we interact with carries a hidden plural history of multiple races, cultures, and lived experiences, how would that fundamentally alter the architecture of our world?
It would change everything.
Exactly. How would it change the way we design our educational systems or the way we approach global conflict resolution? If we truly believed the person sitting across the negotiating table might share our exact ancestral history, just wearing a different lifetime's skin.
That is a lens that fundamentally rewrites the concept of the other.
It really is.
Well, the next time you experience that unexplainable, visceral connection to a place or a culture that shouldn't make sense on paper, Don't be so quick to dismiss it as a random quirk. Maybe it is not a glitch in your biology. Maybe it is just your soul clearly remembering exactly where it has been. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the boundaries you are given, and keep exploring the deeper layers beneath the surface of the world.